Sylvia, why do you think it is important for teachers, student teachers and experienced teachers to understand the history of democracy?
I'd say that if we would like to have an education where teachers actually understand what they do, they cannot just act as if the present is all there is, but be aware of the fact that every single thing they do in the present is interconnected with the past, and it influences people. So this is a very central idea in the book as well, and it's linked to the broad social sciences on which educational research is based. That is the way, that's to say, it's a revolutionary puzzle piece of evidence brought to the table by researchers as, for instance, Hans Georg Gadamer, who showed that even though research tries to be very, very neutral, it always is tinted by people's historical consciousness. So the purpose of actually having a chapter about democracy and history is to show the teachers about how his democracy has developed, some threats in relation to that, and by that giving them a deeper and broader understanding of democracy. Because one of the things which is important to remember here is that democracy is never neutral. It's never neutral. It's always emerging in various situations as a counter-reaction to something. And it's always linked to what a specific society at a given time in history finds as important to cherish. And this value dimension, we hope, is brought to attention in this chapter, the political and value dimension of democracy.
Yeah, so really then, when would you think and say that democracy became important for education and why?
I would say it's crucial for education, or when it became crucial for education, perhaps we should start by that. It looks very different in different countries. So democracy is the process of countries becoming democratic. Doesn't look the same all over the world. It looks very different. Some countries don't even touch upon democracy. So that's important to emphasize. It looks different. But one way to approach the question is to say that democracy was brought into societies with when the nation states were created, when questions like everyone needs education was attended to, when people became aware of their rights and so forth. So it's a long process. But I would say the turning point was the wars in the 20th century. It's the First World War, the brutalities of it, and we need to remember it. Democracy is a reaction to that. So the First World War, all the deaths, but primarily the industrialization, the massacre of people created in a very industrialized fashion in the Second World War, tipped it over, asking more and more people, making more and more people ask the questions, how could these horrible wars actually happen? What was the reason for them to happen? And one of the things people tend to realize at this point, there is a lot of things written about it in a general, on a general level, was that the war, it's not just having weapons that creates war, but war was created based on the perceptions people had, the hierarchical ways of approaching people, the way that some people in this hierarchical pyramid actually was deemed as lesser worth than others. So these questions are really, really important. So there you are. So it's democracy born after the Second World War was a massive reaction against the brutalities a hierarchical society can create. So that changed both societies and education as such, and democracy was brought into.
What kind of democratic traditions exist?
It's important to ask that question, I'd say, Geraldine. I say that there exist a lot of traditions. You have there are a lot of research done about it, trying to pinpoint the various traditions. You have the elite democracy, you have neoliberal democracy, critical democracy, participant democracy and so forth, social democracy, various forms of democracy. But if we want to look upon it from above, it's possible to see two different strands. So one strand which is very narrow and thin, which is often it's simply putting the spotlights and focus upon questions concerning procedures and forms. That is to say, what kind of acts do we have? How does the voting system function? We have the election, you know. In the classrooms, it's about raising your hands, having children organizing and forming themselves in various groups. The majority is often the one which rules. So it's the principles that are focused. And what we maintain in the book, and supported by a lot of researchers, is that this broad way of approaching democracy isn't sufficient. So what we argue for is that democracy needs to be widened. It needs to include other aspects as well in order to be sustainable, in order to last for a longer period of time if we want to have it. Because that's always a question: what do we want? Do we want democracy? So what the broader tradition of democracy emphasizes is that, yes, of course, we need to be aware and have knowledge about the policy acts. We need to, of course, have the elections. That's important to govern a country and so forth. But we also need to have the knowledge to see what's happening in everyday relationships, because that actually matters to democracy. It's tied to questions about ethics, it's tied to questions about social justice, about relational issues, how we interact with each other, the perceptions we actually highlight when we talk. All perceptions aren't equally good for various purposes, but it's important to listen, it's important to toss and turn. So the broad democracy actually puts much more pressure on the system and on people and on education itself, if it's going to be possible to prolong and to keep alive.
Yeah, in the book we've actually connected in with that dimension of teachers' work. We've connected in with the idea of teachers having a democratic assignment. What kind of challenges do you think, Silvia, there are for teachers' democratic assignment in relation to the present?
So the challenge, as I say, for that is that it's really important for allowing space for these kind of issues in education, and be aware of that. Democracy is just one value. It's always in competition with other values. So marketing values, people who wants to narrow it down because it suits them much better, and so forth. So one of the things is to be aware of the fact that when we talk about democracy, we also need to be aware of that it exists in tensions with other perspectives and other values. And as far as I see it, is also, though, an educational issue to make student teachers and teacher educators to become aware of various ways of understanding democracy, because if you do not do that, you're incapable of actually seeing what takes place. So if you listen to students and pupils in the schools and so forth, comrades and people talking to you, fellow teachers talking to you, it's very difficult to be critical, to grapple and to approach them if you don't understand what kind of traditions and perspectives they come from. So these are just some examples. There are much more to be said about this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Silvia. That's very interesting.